Wolcen, Lords of Mayhem, is a game you may have heard about recently after it finally left early access this month to a somewhat disastrous launch. Originally titled Umbra, Wolcen was successfully kickstarted in 2015 and was also in early access for 4 years before finally having its 1.0 launch on February 13th. Unfortunately for the developer, a team aptly named Wolcen Studio and comprised of only around 40 people, it seems that Lords of Mayhem wasn't quite ready to be fully unleashed on the world. And that's a shame, because underneath the server issues and all the bugs, there's an incredible ARPG here waiting to be played. So let's get this out of the way right up front. This game was not ready to leave early access, and to say it needs more time in the oven would unfortunately be somewhat of an understatement. The biggest complaint, and one that is serving to negatively affect its Steam reviews considerably, is that as of recording this, the game's servers have been down since launch, meaning players cannot connect and start an online character or play with others online, and if they do, character progress could be lost or deleted the next time they log in. In the devs' defense, they've been seemingly working around the clock and keeping communication high, and given the team's relatively small size, I'm certain they're doing all they can. In fact, it's more than possible that the servers will be back up by the time this video goes up. However, that would still unfortunately make the situation one of damage control, given how many players have already voiced their frustrations over this issue. If this was the only problem with Wolcen upon its 1.0 launch, it would still be remembered as a pretty bad launch. But unfortunately, the game is also littered with lots of other bugs and small issues. These include assets not loading properly, collision issues, UI bugs, audio glitches, texture pop-in, enemies not being able to be hit or targeted, weird player movement and pathing, occasional input latency. I could go on, but you get the point. There's a lot of bugs. But wait, don't write off Wolcen just yet, because weirdly, despite these many issues, I would still recommend it to any fan of the ARPG genre, and would also say that it actually has the potential to be one of the best examples of the genre released in recent years. It just might be worth waiting for a patch or two, or tempering some expectations, and seeing the potential over the current state of things. So let's talk about presentation and story. Even with some graphics related bugs and issues, Wolcen is still a very pretty game. Built using the CryEngine, a game engine renowned for its visual fidelity, Wolcen really stands out in a lot of areas when compared to its contemporaries, especially when it comes to lighting and texture work. The game also has a great art style that sits somewhere between Path of Exile and Warhammer, as grotesque demons and monsters fight huge, heavily armoured warriors. It's also worth noting that besides the many aforementioned bugs, the actual moment-to-moment performance is pretty strong for the most part, sticking to a solid frame rate regardless of how much might be going on screen. The sound is also pretty good, with great voice acting and crunchy, squelchy noises emanating from the hordes that you slay as you progress. The real standout though is Wolcen's soundtrack, which is filled with great, sweeping orchestral work. While it's true that it does have the occasional bit of indie jank here and there, especially regarding some of the cutscene animations, it's mostly a positive report when it comes to how Wolcen looks and sounds. Story-wise, Wolcen has some interesting ideas, but unfortunately none that really come to fruition in its 20-hour campaign. As with so many entries in the genre, it feels a little bit like a primer for Endgame, and it's after the story is wrapped up that Wolcen really begins to find its rhythm. While this is a shame, it is difficult really to see this as much of a criticism, as it's somewhat par for the course in the world of ARPGs, and it also delivers more in this area than some of its biggest competitors. Nevertheless, the lack of capitalization on these good ideas means that there is some wasted potential here. So, as any fan of the genre will tell you, a good ARPG needs several key elements to succeed, and at the forefront of these is a compelling progression system. While it undoubtedly has some issues in this area, it is here where Wolcen really shines. Unlike its contemporaries, Wolcen has no classes. Instead, you create your character, and then you can use any weapon or skill you like. As you level up, you are given points to place into several categories that help define your build. These categories are ferocity, toughness, agility, and wisdom. Each level gives you 10 points to invest, and your prowess in each category is affected by how you spend them. This means that if you want a good range build, for example, you'll probably be putting your points into agility, with ferocity and wisdom coming second and third, and toughness last. However, wisdom would be your top investment if you wanted, say, a magic user build. On top of this, you are also given a single passive skill point every level, which can be used to unlock nodes on an extremely expansive grid. Such passive skills will increase your character's different stats and can also add positive effects. The sections of the grid can also be rotated, meaning that you can mix and match skills however you like, leading to an almost infinite number of potential build combinations. As if all this wasn't enough, the player can also find and level up new skills and abilities in the world, which are tied to their choice of weapon, and can also bridge different class abilities using gear found in the world. So many systems really gives the player a lot of control over the build they want to make, and also allows you to feel like you're always leveling something, as you decimate hordes of nightmarish creatures. Also, respecking all of these elements is extremely easy to do, meaning if you want to change your build pretty much at any time to something completely different, you can. Such freedom is really Wolcen's greatest strength, and really sets it apart in many ways from its peers. The second element often needed for a great ARPG is a fun and rewarding loot system, and Wolcen has almost hit a home run with this too. Almost. You see, there are several amazing aspects to the loot in Wolcen, such as its variety of weapons and the way they feed into the skill systems, or the great cosmetic system which allows for easy customization. Essentially, whenever you pick up any item, it becomes available as a cosmetic choice, meaning it's easy to keep your favourite look long after the gear has become outdated. However, despite this, there are unfortunately still a few quality of life issues and other elements that could be tweaked in order to elevate the loot system to one that can compare or even exceed its competitors. Firstly, standard inventory space is very limited, meaning lots of teleports back to town to sell items, or sometimes having to constantly manage them on the fly. Secondly, when items drop, there is no information on what they are other than their rarity, meaning you have to pick everything up, check it in your inventory and see if it's worth keeping, and most of the time it's not, which usually means then dropping it again. Also, if you move too far from loot or wait a few seconds, the labels showing you where it is disappears, meaning that it can occasionally be hard to spot or easy to miss. Finally, when completing a side mission for extra loot, there is no comparison panel between the reward and what you already have equipped, forcing you to guess what the best reward might be. Thankfully, all of these elements can be fixed or patched later, once again showing Wolcen's potential is sky high. Still, even as it stands now, Wolcen's loot and gear systems are perfectly serviceable, with only a few minor annoyances. But as with many a genre, above all else, a good ARPG needs to play well. It needs to be fun to continue to slay hordes and hordes of enemies, as you essentially chase numbers in the endgame. Once again, despite many of its issues holding it back, Wolcen still manages to pretty much completely deliver on this front too. The game controls as you might expect, with movement and basic attacks assigned to the left mouse button, special attacks assigned to the number keys and right mouse button, and spacebar acting as dodge roll. Other than standard attacks, other offensive moves and abilities will be drawn from two separate resource pools, willpower and rage. Standard attacks will drive up your rage meter, and using rage-based attacks will deplete that meter, but will charge the willpower meter. Also, many of the larger enemies and bosses have a stagger meter, which will render them immobile for a time when depleted. Lastly, a short way into the game, you unlock a primordial form, which can be changed into for a limited time in order to perform powerful attacks. Choosing when to use this is of paramount importance, as it can really get you out of a jam. All of this means every fight is a balanced tug of war between your resource pools, and requires the player to keep a close eye on several things at once. If you're a fan of the genre, you'll feel right at home playing Wolcen, and it won't take long before you're comboing for larger and larger damage, or dodging just at the right moment to avoid a devastating attack. Needless to say, it's super addictive, and it's once again illustrative of Wolcen nailing it where it counts. In terms of its structure, Wolcen lives a lot from Diablo 3, with a central town which you can teleport back to at any time to sell items and buy new upgrades. It also has a teleport pad system for returning to old areas whenever you like, again lifted almost directly from its contemporaries. I mentioned earlier that the game's campaign is really a primer for Endgame here, and that's the best way to look at it. After beating it, you'll probably find yourself around halfway to the level 90 cap, and it is here that Wolcen's version of Diablo 3 Adventure Mode begins. Essentially, you'll be returned to the game's hub town, and from here, random missions in various areas with various modifiers and objectives can be undertaken. These come in two types, a more standard version or a more extensive and difficult version named Expeditions. Expeditions allow for extra modifiers to be added to increase loot drop chance and financial rewards, and can also be chained together to increase level requirements for the next expedition or mission you undertake. It's pretty standard ARPG fare, but it does the job and becomes addictive incredibly quickly, creating a satisfying gameplay loop. On top of this, the endgame also brings with it a basic base building mechanic, which allows you to build and upgrade the hub town. The advantages to this is it will unlock new missions and expedition types for your player to go on, to earn more money, to continue upgrading the town, and so on and so forth. While not the most intricate or impressive system of its type, and also one that could be accused of being a little grindy given how much buildings cost to upgrade, it does serve to bolster the endgame loop, and alongside the ability to switch your build at pretty much any time, it creates an endgame that will keep you amused for many hours. While it stands as maybe the worst example of a launch in the ARPG genre since Diablo 3, Wolcen Lords of Mayhem is absolutely a game worth checking out for any fan of the genre. While it feels like it has already been through a difficult development cycle, with many of its elements being changed or removed from its original pitch as Umbra on Kickstarter, it seems that a lot of work is still to be done to get it where it needs to be. Essentially, in its current form, it feels like a really good early access title that needed a bit more polish before its 1.0 launch. Still, at a price tag lower than many new releases, it can be at best seen as a game worthy of a look, and at worst one that you should maybe pick up in a month or two after a couple of patches. But almost in spite of myself, I'm leaning towards the former of these two recommendations, not just because it's a game with many great elements and qualities, but also because it is one that I can see becoming one of the best in the genre. It's just a shame that despite so long in early access and so much time in development, Wolcen wasn't quite able to put its best foot forward. However, unlike the likes of Blizzard, a company that in many ways has seemingly not quite learned the necessary lessons from Diablo 3's disastrous launch, Wolcen's problems seem to have mainly come from a struggle to execute ambitious ideas over laziness and ignorance, and that alone deserves some forgiveness and patience.